him 13 years ago, and now he would have grown up into a big man. How are you going to, how do we know who's your son? Right? It's so difficult. What a difficult question to ask after 13 long years. Even it's doubtful, even the mother would be able to identify her son. So that's one of the highlight of the story. That particular scene is very, very important. And then comes the soldiers' ball, as I said, when the nigger regiments come to this place, and they are sort of having a ball where all these soldiers are dancing, and they are making fun of her when she's wearing a red turban, and all that things are happening side by side. But what really touches us is that her constant effort to look for her son. So it's not just on the one side, even on the other side you'll find the same thing happening. Henry is also making various attempts. He has made various attempts to find his mother. Like, he has changed his jobs, he's worked as a barber, he keeps changing his jobs, moving from one officer to the other, only in search of his mother. And it is during the soldiers' ball that the two meet. Rachel and Henry, they meet face to face. And the significance of the statement is, I ain't had no trouble and no joy. That's how the story concludes, because that was the question that Mr. C had asked. So she says, oh no, Mr. C, I ain't had no trouble and no joy. So if you think, I'm not complaining here, that's what she wanted to say. This is not a complaint, it's just that I'm talking about my experience. Since you asked me that you would not have had any trouble in life, so I'm just narrating you to the story. So I still say that I had no trouble and had no joy. I have not even experienced what joy is. Now, look at the structure of the story, the various elements of the story that you'll find. Title, as we had already mentioned earlier, that it's a true story according to the author. He has had a encounter with this kind of a story, which he thought that he has to write it down, and that's how this a true story came into existence. So the title, according to the author, is very, very apt, because it's a true story which he's trying to narrate here. Now, when we look at the exposition, then the introducing, how does he introduce the various characters? You know, the two characters, the two narrators, right, at the beginning of the story, they are introduced. And then you have Henry who comes in, you have the officers who come in. These are some of the characters, but along exposition, you will find that the setting is also being explored. So here it's the summit of the hill where there's a farmhouse. So it's in the porch of the farmhouse that Rachel and her master, they are there. And it's here the story begins. So everything is slowly brought forth in the exposition itself, in the introduction itself. The story begins with the introduction of the two major characters, that is the first narrator, the two narrators that we have in the story, and also the setting where the story is set in a farmhouse, on the porch of a farmhouse on the summit of the hill. And then you look at the situations wherein it was just a casual question which prompted, and then how the entire story is brought forth by Aunt Rachel. Who are the narrators here? We have Mr. C. You have the narrators are the characters here, Mr. C and Aunt Rachel. And then you have Henry. They are not the narrators here, but Henry and soldiers. What are the places that are being the settings, when we focus on the settings, there's a mention of Virginia, where Aunt Rachel lived, Maryland, where her mother lived, and then we're talking about the place that they're right now. The story is taking place, rather, the narration is taking place in a farmhouse porch on the summit of a hill. And when we look at the setting, it's a summertime and there's twilight. Two narrators are sitting, that is Aunt Rachel, below the level of her master. When we look at the action, now any story, as there is an introduction where the characters, the setting and everything is introduced to the reader, there is some kind of dramatic action that takes place. Unlike a novel, in a short story, it has to happen and it has to, the action has to, there is a rising action, there's a climax and there's a falling action. All this has to happen suddenly. There's not much scope for further development of the action. So everything happens very swiftly. So you'll find that Aunt Rachel's reaction is somewhere, we can say that where the rising action takes place, where the plot moves forward, and then there's a flashback. And in the flashback you have the action scene, you see the auction scene, all the members of Aunt Rachel's family are being sold out except Henry. And then while she is making several protests, when her family members are being sold, she's beaten up, and there's a lot of action in this part of the narration of Aunt Rachel. And then Henry is sold and finally they reunite. So you'll find that the rising action, there's a climax, that's the part. What is the climax? When we look at it, it is that part of the action wherein the protagonist is no going back. Aunt Rachel is at the worst position when she has lost out on each member of a family. And then slowly you will find all these things have been justified very well. The plot, you will find, has very well explored. Mark Twain has very well explored the plot with the rising action, the crisis that you find, which you can identify particularly in the auction scene from there onwards, and how it reaches the climax. And then the story concludes with a happy reunion of the mother and the son. So this is how it looks like. The exposition, where you have the characters that are introduced, the beginning of the story, where both the narrators are there. You have Aunt Rachel and you have the first narrator, Mr. C. These are the two characters who are introduced. You have the settings, that is, as I told you, it's a porch of the farmhouse, and exposition takes place, and then there is a rising action where, and till the falling action, as you can find, all the dramatic elements you will find within this framework of the story, right from the auction, the narration of the auction, or rather from the moment the Mr. C questions about the reason why she is cheerful all the while, and from there when she reacts to that question, the rising action begins, because then there is a lot of drama in the that is the dramatic elements that you will find till the end, where there is denouement. There is it's resolved, because ultimately she wanted to reunite with her youngest son Henry. The others were sold off and gone, but he was too small to be able to be sold as a slave. It was unfortunate that such a young boy was also separated from his mother. But then finally, after 13 years, when they reunite, that becomes very important. Now this is a picture of Aunt Rachel. So the description that fits very well the author presents sketch of a southern black woman speaking in the typical southern drawl, who has learned to come to terms with adversities and smiles in face of all odds. Now this is how she is. She's become tough, and the tough look you can find in this picture. She relates her life story to her masters in a master-of-fact manner, whereby all her 7 children and other family members were sold off in an auction. The author also makes a severe, albeit subtle, critique of the practice of slavery and exploitation of blacks in American history. This is how the true story is all about. Now, we have Mark Twain here. This is the author, a white man who has shown his concern for this bad patch of the American history, which is certainly critiqued through his writings. I would like to also talk about that one aspect where Aunt Rachel says, well, that was my old man gone, and all my children, all my 7 children, and 6 of them I haven't set eyes on again to this day. Now it's so painful when Aunt Rachel talks about the loss of all the family members, where she narrates that all of them were gone, one after the other. And that's 21 years ago, and was Easter when Henry was 13 years. The man that bought me belonged to Newbern, and he took me there. Well, by the years roll on, wow come the war. She's talking about the Civil War, American Civil War. My master, he was a Confederate colonel, and I was his family's cook. So when the Unions took that town, they all ran away and left me all by myself with the other niggers, and in that monstrous big house. So the big Union officers move in there, and they ask me, would I cook for them? Lord bless you, says I. That's what I is for. That means she has already accepted her fate, that for her, she's lived all her life as a cook. She has to cook for the whites, and that's her duty, and she has gladly accepted her duty. There's no regret here. So when one master goes and the other group of people come and take over, that's what, when they ask her to cook for them, that's her response. Lord bless you, because you are asking me to do what I am born to do, what I am supposed to do. Somebody who has accepted her fate. So this is when you will find there's something I'd like to talk about when Henry, well, I thinks to myself. That's why I said the kind of language that's used here. It's a typical dialect of the Southern American dialect. If my little Henry ever got a chance to run away, he'd make to the north, of course. North, she says, of course. So one day, I come in the war, the big officers was in the parlor, and it drops a kerchief. So am I up on toll? But my Henry, they are listening to my troubles, just they may seem, as if I was white folks. And I says, what I come for is because if he got away and got up northward, Yugemin comes from you, might seen him, maybe, and could let me so as I could find him again. He was very little, and he had a scar, he says, scar, that's what she says, scar, on his left wrist and at the top of his forehead. So there are 2 scars that he has, one on his left wrist and one on the forehead. Then they look mournful, and the general says, "How long since you lost them?" And I say, 13 years. Then the general, I say, "He wouldn't be little no more now. You can't keep calling him little Henry anymore, because now it's 13 years have passed and he's a man now." I never thought of that before. He was only that little fella to me yet. See, these lines are very, very touchy. It touches our heart and soul, because this is a mother's voice, where the mother says that it's a voice of a mother, where she says, "I never thought of that before. He was only that little fellow to me yet." How can a mother think that the son has grown up and he is a man now? For a mother, a child is a child, no matter how many years pass by. So this is a true story of a mother in anguish and in pain, a mother who has lost her entire family, her husband and her children, 7 children for that matter. And this adds pain to the readers. You know, it evokes pain among the readers to see that so much of atrocities took place when slavery was existent in America. Thank you.
Sandhan, All Gujarat Integrated Classroom.
સેટેલાઇટના માધ્યમથી જોડતી કડી એટલે સંધાન.